So I hope this morning to follow the same pattern. As I said earlier, we haven't got Sunday school again this morning, and so if you are a Sunday school child, you should have a clipboard. You should have your Explorer pack. They're at the back of the room if you need to go and get them, and that'll just help you hopefully concentrate during the sermon. The idea isn't that it distracts you from what's going on up here, but helps you to listen. So you should have a clipboard. And the clipboard reminds you that there's something to learn. The reason that you've come to church is that there's information from God's word. There's news, there's message, there's things that we can learn about the future, about God, about ourselves, that we need to learn and need to go into our brains, into our minds for us to think about. There's a piece of chocolate at the back. There's a piece of chocolate. That's part of your Explorer's pack. In the Bible we read, taste and see that the Lord is good. There's something here for us to experience, to taste. There's a God to know and to love. There's a magnifying glass. My wife said last week I should have put something on the sheet that was really, really small so you had something to look at. It's good to have wives who are cleverer than us, isn't it? So I have not learned that lesson. I'll try and think of something next week that you'll be able to use the magnifying glass to spot. But the idea of the magnifying glass is to remind you that there's something to see. There's something to see. That hymn was just looking into heaven, gazing into heaven, thinking about what God has in store for us in the future. And if we see that future, it will change the present. Something for us to see. The most important thing we need to see is the Lord Jesus Christ, who he is and what he's come to do. And then crayons. You can't make much use of a clipboard without crayons, so something for you to scribble, but also to remind you that we're here to create. We're here to live. We're here to live out in God's creation and to do things, to create things, to make things, to do things that bring him honor and glory. The other thing that's similar to last week is the way that we're going to do the teaching. So last week, you remember there was a story about an imaginary place, and then later on I used that story to try and help us understand the passage of God's word. And so we're going to do the same today. There's going to be a story. So hopefully you enjoy stories. Again, this is a story that I've made up. The hero of this story is a woman. Quite an old woman. Not too old, but quite old. Old enough to be experienced and know what she's doing, but not too old that she's weak and unable to do what she wants to do. I'm not going to give you the whole story now. I'm just going to give you the beginning and the middle. What's missing? The end. The end is missing. So that means you'll have to listen later on for the end of the story. But here we go with the beginning and the middle. There was a woman who bought a house. And I don't know if any of you have bought a house, but one of the most important things you need to do when you find a house is have a good look at the area that you're moving into. Have a good look at the place, the environment that you're buying your house in. And this lady had always wanted to live by a great big manor house, a bit like Margam Park. I think we've got one up there. You perhaps can't see it. So there's a house a bit like Margam Park. She wanted to live near there. She knew she couldn't afford to buy it, but she wanted to live close so she could visit. And that's what she did. She found a house near to an old estate. The estate used to be, there used to be a lord of the manor who owned the manor house and lived in the manor house and had built lots of smaller houses for all of his workers and his people to live in. The manor was now a ruin. No one really went up there. But the houses were still there and they'd been kept in good shape and they'd been passed on. And so that's where she lived. It wasn't a grand house, but it was a nice house. And it was that house that she bought. The land was still part of the old manor. So much beauty in the area of trees, forests, even a beach to enjoy. The lady was a really keen gardener. And whenever she moved house, that was her main project. She wanted to make the garden just right. And one of her highest priorities, one of the things she wanted to do most in that garden, was a nice, pristine lawn. She wanted real grass, not fake grass. And she wanted to take care of that grass. She wanted it well cut, no weeds, no divots. She had that bowling green sort of picture in her mind, a bit like that. That's what she was aiming for. That's what she was dreaming for. She'd achieved it a few times, and she was keen to achieve it again. Well, the day comes when she moves into this house, and it's the end of a row of houses, and the garden comes right around the edge of the house, sort of swings from the back of the house right around to the front. In fact, it stretched so far around the side that it didn't really look anymore like the garden. It looked like a common area that anybody could be on. It didn't look that it was linked to the house at all. But it was hers. She owned it. It was in the deeds. And she was excited to get gardening, to get cultivating. And when she bought the house, the garden was a mess. A real mess. It was a tip. Perhaps some of your gardens look like that, and you dream of a pristine lawn to enjoy. It was overgrown, it was covered in weeds and rubbish. All sorts of things had been dumped there. Litter, boards, the odd mattress. It wasn't a great garden to play in or to enjoy. But in the mess, in the chaos, she saw potential and she got to work. It took time, it took effort, but it was worth it. The ground was dug up, it was leveled, the weeds were treated, it was landscaped, and she rolled out the turf. New plants were planted, a bench was put in, a pond, even a swing. After a couple of years of effort, so long gardens can take, what she had first seen only in her imagination was now a reality, a beautiful garden. It was good, so good. Now, as I said, this garden wrapped right around the house and went on and on around the corner. It had no fence when she bought the house, and she chose not to fence it off. She wanted people to enjoy the space. This garden wasn't just for her. As she did put up a sign, please enjoy the garden. Don't damage the lawn. Children, you're welcome to play. Just treat it with care. Clean up after you and don't damage the lawn. People came from all over the village to enjoy the garden. She would love to sit and watch the children play, to swing on the swings and to enjoy the space. Everyone except Sid. Sid lived in the house opposite. Sid was miserable, grumpy, and jealous. Sid didn't have a very nice garden. Do you know what Sid had in his garden? Tractors. Lots of tractors. Sid collected tractors. He liked nothing more than to dig up the ground and make a thoroughly good mess. The lady had worked hard. For years she'd worked on a garden and she deserved a break. She decided to go on a holiday for a couple of weeks. So she set the sprinklers. She programmed them all to water the garden and water the plants. The filtration system on the pond was all set and ready to go. A little bit of plant food was scattered. The garden should be fine as long as everyone kept the rules. While she was away, the local cricket team had a bit of a crisis. They had a match lined up. Something had happened to their pitch. Someone had driven a tractor all over the village cricket pitch. It had all been dug up and scratched and ruined. There was no way that cricket pitch could be used. As the team were discussing where they could play their next match, guess who popped into the clubhouse? Sid. Sid popped his head into the clubhouse and said, I know somewhere where you can play cricket. I've seen a place. And he took them to the ladies' garden. The garden looked ideal, flat, level, short grass, pristine condition. As someone said, well, the sign does, say welcome to play. They couldn't believe their luck. And so they got going. The cricket stumps came out and got driven into the lawn. Some of the ground was a bit stiff, so a hammer came out and hammered these stumps into the lawn, breaking up the turf. Someone had a spray can, so they thought they'd better mark out the pitch and the lines. The bowlers stamped in their heels into the grass, marking out where they'd bowl. The batsman batted his bat into the grass, scarring the lawn, scratching the soil off the top. Fielders dived to make catches, making all sorts of marks in the lawn. They were having a great time. They stopped for a break, oranges were handed out, and there was no bin at hand, so the oranges were thrown on the floor. Don't worry, they'll rot. It's good for the soil anyway. After the match, a barbecue was set up, and people came from here and there. They had a great day. The charcoal continued to burn after they'd left, and left a scorching hole on the grass. Rubbish littered the garden. Cans, wrappers, apple cores, bottles floated in the pond. They'd had such a good day, they came back again next week. The lady returned 2 weeks later and found her precious garden in utter disarray. The sprinkler had been pulled out so the hose could provide water for drinks. The grass had not been fed. What was left of the grass was yellow. There were large patches where the turf had been removed. All the area where the cricket match had played was just mud. Rubbish was everywhere, rotting fruit and flies and insects. The swing was broken, hanging off by one rope, and the welcome sign had been thrown into the pond. She looked at the damage of her beautiful garden, made to be enjoyed and now destroyed. The lady got into her car. She drove to B&Q. She bought some fence posts and she fenced off her garden. No one could now enter but her. The garden was closed. This sermon is going to draw on a couple of different passages. Genesis 2 really and Revelation 21 are the main ones. So if you want a finger in each of those, that will be helpful. So children, remember, you need to keep listening because you haven't yet heard the end of the story. And also, the beginning and the middle of that story hopefully is going to help us in the beginning and middle of this sermon. So you'll need, hopefully, to use that story to help us understand what we've got to learn today. I don't know about you, but I love restorations. I love bringing things back to life. And not things that are dead as such and back to life. I haven't got that power or that skill. But old things that are battered and bruised and broken, and restoring them. Since we've lived on this street in Corporation Road, I feel like I've spent a good 30% of my time sanding floorboards. An awful lot of floorboards in my house, and an awful lot of them have been sanded back, hours spent restoring them. They were covered in paint, they were all uneven. Some of them were loose, some of them were rotten, some of them needed to be replaced. And restoring them. When lockdown's over, I'll happily welcome you in and you can enjoy my floorboard. You're not allowed to stand on them, but you can enjoy my floorboards. There is a YouTube channel that I like to watch, and it's got this chap, I think it's a chap, all you can actually see is this individual's hands. So I think he's got a sort of GoPro camera on him, and you see these black gloves at work with all sorts of different tools. It seems to be mainly tools that he restores, but he finds a really scratchy lump of junk tool, some electronic or mechanical device that's all rusted and battered and bruised. And you think, no one's going to look at that. Chuck it in the bin. Take it down the tip. And he brings it onto his desk, and he begins taking it apart. Screw after screw comes out, springs pop up, and he lines them all up. They look like they haven't got a hope of ever being used for anything helpful ever again. Bit by bit, bracket by bracket, nail by nail, everything is taken apart. And then he scrubs them, sands them, hammers them straight. He replaces bits that can't be repaired. He puts it all back together. Painted, glossed, repurposed, refashioned. And they don't just look good, they work. The guillotine is able to slice paper. The bread slicer is able to cut bread again. The drill is able to drill powerful holes. They're practical and purposeful. He's a master restorer. Last week we began to look at this subject of the new heavens and the new earth, the future life that awaits the children of God. In lockdown 1, we looked at being children of God, didn't we? In lockdown 3, we're looking at what the future is for the children of God. What is our inheritance? What is God giving us? And if you're not a child of God, and if you don't belong to Jesus, then what are you missing out on? What are you letting slip by? What are you putting to side and prioritizing other things? We recognize that for many of us, we were pretty high up on the fed-up scale. A few hands were lifted in the room, and afterwards a few people came up to me to say that it resonated, that the fed-up scale was a real thing, that they were very fed up, and they couldn't remember a time when they'd been much more fed up. And perhaps then we wondered if this might be an opportunity for us to consider what comes after this life. If we're fed up, if we're disillusioned with the world as it is right now, maybe we might be more willing than normal to think about what's coming next, to think about the world ahead. Now, some of you might have an objection to the way my mind has gone. Some of you might have been thinking, that's not good thinking. You're just being religious. Typically religious. Things get bad in this world, and so you wind up your make-believe book, and you hope that something pops out to make you feel better. The world is a bad place right now, and you want to feel a little better, so you wind up your imaginary book and hope something pops up to make you feel better about the life that you're currently going through. So there's a made-up, fictional, fairy tale land. And you dream about it. You feel better. It's just escapism. It's a religious Netflix binge. It's just the same as streaming loads and loads of episodes of something else. You're just distracting yourself from the horrible realities that you're in right now. Is that fair? Is that what we're about? Is that what we've come to do today? Just escape? My response would be, I'd have a few things to say, but my time's running out. My response would be that our hopes are rooted in a man who lived on this earth. We don't have a wind-up book, but they're rooted in a historical man. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He lived on this earth. They're rooted in the person of Jesus. As we saw last week, the King who is returning. I can't even remember what my fictional place was called. But what were the people of that land waiting for, hoping in? The King coming back. They'd seen him. They'd seen the tower fall. They realized they were liberated. They'd seen it. They'd touched him. They'd been near him. And they were waiting for him to come back. It was a realistic thing. It was a rational thing to do, to wait for the one who'd won the victory. He was true to his word. And he also said he was coming back, so we trust him to come back. And in the Bible we have records of Jesus' life and ministry, the things that he said and did. And we trust that record. We trust his word. He was true to his word in rising from the dead 3 days after he was crucified. So if you're struggling to follow my thinking, then I'd encourage you to look closely at who Jesus is. Look closely at the resurrection. Look closely at what he's come to earth to do. This church is a church that is excited to tell everybody and anybody about who he is. So don't get this wrong. This series isn't "the world is rubbish right now. Let's think about heaven for a little bit and hope it gets better soon." That's not what I'm doing. I'm not trying to fill up your time or distract you. No, this is, let's take a good, hard look at the lives we're living. Let's take a good, hard look at the world that we're living in and ask those big questions. Can this world really give me all that it promises to? Are my hopes and dreams, my ambitions, are they secure here? Are they safe? Is it rational and reasonable to have all my hopes here? Jesus said, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's why we're looking at this subject. We're looking at the treasure that God has provided for us. So this world to come, this new heavens and the new earth, what can we know about it? Well, a good place to start is at the beginning of the Bible. That's why we read from Genesis chapter 2. In God's world, again and again, we hear about the heavens, the new heavens and the new earth. God's work, a bit like that master craftsman I was telling you about earlier, is restorative. Part of his work in the new heavens and the new earth is taking us back. We'll see in future weeks that there's more than that, but a helpful way of looking at it is looking back. We're going back somewhere. Something is being regained. Something is being recovered. Something is being restored. God is going to return this world to its former glories. Now, the new heavens and new earth gets better than that, but that's a great place to start. Going back to how good it was in the beginning, having a good hard look at the Garden of Eden and thinking, oh, to be there. To be there. To breathe in that air, to be in that atmosphere, to be walking in the garden with God, to have peace with him, to have communion with him, to have peace with one another. The Bible describes what God will do in the future by linking it to what he's done in the past, and it does that with language. In the beginning, we read, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. In our reading, in verse 4 of chapter 2, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. And then when it all goes wrong, and we'll cover that in a minute, the Bible doesn't give up talking about the heavens and the earth. In the middle of the book, we hear from Isaiah, for behold, God speaking, I create new heavens and a new earth. It's part of the story, part of the promise of this Messiah, this hero who's going to come. It's all wrapped up in the same good news story that God's ancient people have been told. There's a king coming, and he's going to restore everything. Not just the good days of Israel are coming back, but there'll be a new heavens and a new earth. And in the New Testament, when Jesus comes, we can see that there's a break between those two things. There's a break between the Jesus coming and Jesus coming again. There's a break between the door opening to resurrection life and that resurrection life coming in fullness when the King returns. So this use of language, heavens and earth, new heavens and new earth, helps us to look backwards. God is going to do something like he did before. God is going to take us back to a state that's something like it was before. So let's have a look at creation then. I don't know if you've noticed this before, but in Genesis chapter 1, which we didn't read, but hopefully it's familiar to a few of you, and it's just there before Genesis chapter 2, if you've got your Bible open. In Genesis chapter 1, how the balance of God's creative work, the way we're told this story, this account of God making the world, there's a number of things going on in the chapter, but one particular balance I want to point out to you. The first 3 days, God seems to be making a space, or making spaces and an environment. And in the second 3 days, he seems to be filling those spaces. So on day 1, God says, let there be light and darkness. Light and darkness are separated. God creates light by speaking. On day 4, then, the parallel day, we have the sun and the moon and the stars in those heavens, in those atmospheres. On day 2, we have the heaven and the waters separated. On the second day, that's what happens. That's what God creates. And on day 5, the parallel day, we have those waters filled with living creatures. And the birds fill the heavens. God is filling the space that he's earlier made. On day 3, we have vegetation and plants upon the earth. And on day 6, we have creatures filling that space, filling the earth. On day 6, we also have mankind, and chapter 2 gives us a retelling of that story. They're separate, aren't they? Humanity is separate and unique. They alone are made in the image of God. But they, like in those other days, are also made to fill. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on earth." This is a glorious world that the Lord has made. It's full of rich diversity of life. How many of you enjoy watching those BBC documentaries on TV that explore the animal kingdom or explore the natural kingdom? And those programs, though they don't know it, are hymns to God's praise, aren't they? The wonderful things that God has made, life's rich diversity. It's him. He is the artist. He is the designer. And yet the Bible is telling us humanity isn't just part of that list of species, but is at the very pinnacle of what God is doing. They have the instructions to subdue, to have dominion, to rule under God's authority, under his power, under his throne, but they're to rule. They're vice-regents. We saw in our reading God planting in his own creation a garden in Eden. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. God has cultivated a space for mankind to be, a home, a paradise. Creation was clearly made by God's power, called into existence by his voice. And yet it's given, in a sense, to mankind. It's their playground, it's their workplace. Now, children, do you remember the story? What did the lady want? What was top on her list? Did she want a new roof? Did she want a nice garage? Did she want a jacuzzi? Did she want a cinema room or a gym? She wanted a garden. She wanted to create and plant a garden. She wanted a beautiful space that everybody could come and enjoy. There were rules. Just like in God's garden there were rules. But it was a place for everyone to enjoy. Her efforts were put into making this garden, making this mess, this chaos, a place that could be dwelt in and enjoyed. And God, the Bible tells us that the earth was without form and void before God came. God has made it a habitable place. And in Eden especially, God has planted specifically a garden. This is a particular paradise. In a perfect world that God has made, there's a particular paradise, a particular environment that God has made for his man, for his king, to live and reign in this world. So God has created heaven and earth. He's made a place where he could dwell with his people. He's made a garden where he can walk and share communion with him. And they, like him, have work to do. They were told to be fruitful and to multiply. Humanity was to express itself. The beauty that God had created, the fingerprints that he had placed here, there, and everywhere, was to be replicated. They were to go out, and as his image bearers were to be creative people. They were to fill the earth, spread the earth as God's reflectors. God had placed them in this garden paradise, but they had work to do to make the rest of the world a paradise, to extend it. The whole world, it seems, was to be an extension of what God had made in Eden. Be fruitful and multiply. and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. Can you see how that picture, that reality, that history of ours helps us think about the new heavens and the new earth? It's not like some of our pictures that we've got of heaven in our heads. People aren't isolated. Often when you see depictions of heaven, you see someone isolated, someone on their own, someone on a cloud with a harp, someone wandering about. But God didn't think it was good for man to be alone, so he created Eve. Community was good news. Family was good news. Belonging was good news. People are to be together. And people aren't floating either. People are in bodies. We learned that last week, didn't we? We'll have resurrection bodies. Well, it might help us to look back into Eden, the perfect body that God had created for Adam and for Eve. They had a physical existence. They were tasting fruit and enjoying it. They were working the ground. They were laboring with their hands. Adam, as he names the animals, it has some scientific tasks, doesn't he, to categorize all of the animals that there are. I don't think he's just going leopard, frog, giraffe. I think the task is a bit more than that. He's looking at them and studying them. He's understanding what God is doing, and he's naming them. He's understanding God's creative hand. People have work and activity to do. People have duties and responsibilities. And so the Bible tells us that we'll be working in heaven. We'll have work to do. We'll have tasks to enjoy. This world was made by God. We have nothing in the Bible to suggest that what is coming is without these physical blessings, these physical realities. We mustn't get into our heads that earth is a bad place, heaven is a good place, and the reason that earth is a bad place is because it's physical, and the reason because heaven is a good place is because it's not physical. I know, this earth was made by God. We can understand a little bit now why it goes wrong, but God is going to restore the world. Someone on the radio said this morning, I'm pretty sure it was Benjamin Zephaniah. I didn't hear him get introduced, but I'm pretty sure it was him, and what he said tied into what he thinks. So Benjamin Zephaniah, the poet and scholar, he said, we're not just wanting this pandemic to be over. We're not just wanting to go back to normal. We've got to learn some lessons. We should change our relationship to our environment. He's a vegan, and so he ties a lot of this to eating meat. And we shouldn't be doing that. But anyway, he was broadly saying we need to change our relationship with the environment that we live in. That's a big deal for our day, isn't it? I don't know how many of you parents get flack off your children for the environment. I don't know if they teach this in school, but they've obviously been told that it's our fault. The state that the world is in is our fault as a generation. It was me, apparently, that did it all. And there's a sense in which they're right, aren't they? Humanity has ruined the environment that we're in. The things that we've enjoyed. The way that we've treated the world that God has made. Global warming and all sorts of related crises that are around. And what has our response been? What has the church's response been to the environmental crisis? Is it something that we ignore because there's a heaven eventually, so it's okay? Well, the Bible is telling us that this is God's world, and he cares about it. It's his creation. It has his fingerprints on it, his mark, so we should care. This world was made by God, and it belongs to him. But, and there's a big but, this world is under God's curse. This world is under God's curse. Children, what did you think in the story when the woman put the fence up? At the end of the middle of the story. She puts a fence up. Can you blame her? She'd done all of that hard work, all of that effort, all of that struggle to make a lovely place for them to play and enjoy, and they trashed it and ruined it. Can you blame her for saying, keep out? There's now a fence. You can't come in. It was a good place for you to enjoy, but you broke the rules, and the chance is gone. It's mine, and I'm taking it back. Can you think how that relates to the story of God's garden? When Adam and Eve broke God's rules, there weren't many rules for them to keep. Enjoy it all, don't eat from one tree. Enjoy it all, don't eat from one tree. They had everything to enjoy. And yet they rebelled against God. And God kicks them out. You didn't listen to the rule, and so you're not allowed inside. You can't have access to this tree of life anymore. You can't have access to me anymore. The Garden of Eden, this paradise, instead of being extended, is fenced in. Is guarded. Humanity is excluded. They fail to listen to God. And so at that moment, this world is terribly changed. The language the Bible uses, it's under God's curse. Sin and rebellion has broken into our hearts. In comes death and disease. Everything about this world becomes hard and difficult. So much of what the environmentalists say is right. It is wrong to treat the environment in the way that it's been treated. But they are wrong to think paradise can return. Utopia can return, that we can fix the problems in this world completely and utterly to a point where that can be made new. They're wrong to think that they can rescue it. We should try, but we can't. Children, have a little look at the back of your worksheet, or the second sheet, sorry. And you'll see a verse from the second chapter that we're thinking of today. I will make all things new. Or I will make everything new. It's a verse from Revelation. It's from a chapter 21 where God is telling us all about the new heavens and the new earth. And he's saying, I'm going to make everything new. I will make it new. God has put me on this seat, on this throne. And the time is now. The king is coming back. And as I come back, I'm making everything new. Now, when we think of new, we think of going to the shop and buying something new. But what I'm trying to tell you is God is turning the old new. Because the people in heaven around the throne are people who've been on earth. And they're there. They're part of this new. God is taking the old things in this world and renewing them. He's washed them and he's cleansed them, and they're part of this new creation. And this world, in a sense, will be destroyed, but it'll also be renewed. It's hard for us to keep all of the passages in the Bible together and be clear quite what's going to happen. But he's doing it. And Jesus alone is doing it. And if we put our hopes in anyone else to fix this world and to fix the future, then they're going to crumble and fail. I will make everything new. The hope of that rescue, of that restoration, is all on Jesus. And that's there at the beginning of the Bible, at the beginning of the story. In chapter 3 of Genesis, we have this promise of a seed. The serpent has come in, a bit like Sid. That's the one in the picture, if you want to chat about that in over dinner. So if you think about the story that we told at the beginning, and we think about the story we have in the Bible, you have this invader, don't you? This person who comes in to trick and deceive and destroy. And Sid in the story is a bit like the serpent, who comes in jealous and envious and sowing seeds of doubt. Humanity's fault for listening to him. They should have ruled the serpent, listened to God, but they listen to the serpent and want to make themselves gods. But God promises, as he curses the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above the livestock and above all the beasts of the field. On your belly you shall go, and the dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will, God says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Right at the beginning of this story, right at the beginning of this world, God is promising one will come to bring back paradise. One will come to crush the enemy. Seed, that means look out for the human line. Look out for someone coming in this line that God is promising to bless, but I will put enmity. God is doing this activity. And this mutual bruising, this fight. Someone's heel is getting bruised, but someone's head's getting crushed. Ever been in a fight? Ever come away from a fight with scars? Had a bit of a scrap? Well, you know when you've won if you're in a better shape than the other person. If you've come out with a bit of a scratch on your heel, but the other person's got a crushed skull, you probably won. Probably going to prison as well. This victory is decisive. The seed wins. Jesus wins. It's pointing us to the battle that we see throughout Christ's ministry, but culminating in his cross. As he takes the place of sinful, rebellious humanity, and he fights the fight that we couldn't win. He crushes the serpent. He defeats death. Our crime as a race must be paid by us. God holds the penalty of our rebellion over us, and so the way he's going to pay that penalty is becoming one of us, that he can pay the price to redeem us. Have you noticed in Christ's miracles, in his miracles during his earthly ministry, how he's able to reverse the curse? The curse that we see in our world now with death and disease. Can you see Christ reversing it? He brings healing to the sick. He brings sight to the blind. He calms the storm. He feeds the hungry and raises the dead. All of the things we see that the darkness has crept in and broken into God's good planet, brought all of these invasions in, Christ is able to peel back their power. He's able to say, get up, to the girl who's dead. He's able to open the eyes of the blind. What's he able to do in those moments? He's able to show us the future. What kind of life, what kind of existence this king is able to bring. And so by the time we get to Revelation 21 and he's on the throne, we're seeing him in the position that God has put him in. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And now he's in charge. The serpent is crushed. Nothing can stop him. The king's come back. So there's no more death. And there's no more disease. And there's no more pain. And the tears are gone. They're wiped dry. He's in charge. He's on the throne. And so we have a glimpse. He's given us glimpses in those moments of what his power is able to do, the transformative power that he's able to work in those people's lives. And what the Bible is telling us, that is extended right across the globe. He's doing it on a mass scale. Death ends, disease ends, it's over. The creation is completely and utterly restored. The curse is lifted. Children, I told you the beginning and the middle of the story, but not the end. I wonder if any of you have been imagining your own end to the story. I wonder what you think that woman did next. She's put up a fence. People walk past. They remember what that garden was like. They remember how much fun it was to swing on the swing. They remember spotting fish swimming in the pond. They remember the sad day. They enjoyed the cricket match. They had fun, but they didn't treat her with respect. And they'd broken all her rules. And so they walk past and feel guilty for all that they did. How does the story end? Well, that lady restored her garden. She worked on it behind the fence, and she got it back. The fences weren't permanent. She never planned them to be permanent. She wrote a letter to her neighbours and explained how they'd hurt her, how they'd broken the one rule, but told them that one day the garden would be open again. Not to forget about it, but to remember it. Remember the joy that they had. And also to realize that the garden would be bigger and better. The lawn would be greener. There would be more ponds. She'd recognized that they liked cricket, so she was going to make them a cricket pitch. There would be an adventure playground and more. Nobody quite understood how she could do all of that in that small space. It'd been a lovely garden, but it wasn't that big. Do you know how she did it? She inherited so much money. She was able to buy the old manor house. And with the manor house, all of the land that came with it. The mountains, the hills, the forest, all the way down to the coast. All of the houses were now hers, including Sid's. Sid was evicted. His tractors were taken away. She opened up all of that land to everybody. Her garden extended right across the area. All of the enemies of the garden were thrown out. We shouldn't be looking for our happy ever after here. We shouldn't be looking just for the fence posts to be coming down. All of our hopes and expectations shouldn't be in this world. Whether they're school results or friendships, family, marriages, money, success, health, whatever our hopes are in, whatever our dreams are, whatever that is pushing you further up that fed up scale. If I had this back, I wouldn't be so fed up. We are in God's world. It's under a curse. Expect things to be hard. Expect things to be tough. Expect weeds to turn up in your workplace. They're going to be there. Our future is in God's control. He's given all authority to his Son. I haven't got time to spend the time I wanted to in Revelation 21. Let me just read a little bit. And then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city in Jerusalem, in the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And then I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore." Later on, we read of the curse being lifted, the curse being removed, taken away. 22 verse 3. "No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him." Fellowship with God is restored. We don't want to so imagine a future heaven and a future earth that is beautiful and wonderful and a paradise, but we're somehow having that without God. You've missed it. We'll see in future weeks that the future is all about God, all about knowing him, all about enjoying him, all about enjoying him in the world that he has made. Are you hoping for lockdown to end? I think we're all hoping for lockdown to end. No one's enjoying this. But don't have all of your hopes there. Broaden your horizons to the day when the curse is lifted. Not the lockdown is lifted, but the curse is lifted. Where the sad things we see in this world are no longer there. This is a place for the King and his people to live. Later on in verse 21, we read, end of verse 6. "And he said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the springs of the water of life without payment.'" This future is free. This future I can offer you today. The living waters, the life that Christ is offering humanity for a future is free. You can't give him anything. This is a gift that he is giving to you. And yet, verse 7, "The one who conquers will have this heritage. I will be his God, and he will be my son." To the one who conquers. This book, this picture language of Revelation is written to people who are struggling, people who are being persecuted for their faith, A people who have aligned themselves to Christ, and because they did, life didn't end up like a paradise, but it got painful, really hard, really quick. And so the hopes were challenged. The threats came close to taking that hope away. And this promise is coming to those who conquer, those who hold on to this hope in dark days. It's a free gift. And it's a free gift worth fighting for. Don't lose grip. And if you've never had it, don't let it pass by. Take it today. Amen.